Hello, welcome back. This is my channel, the Biblionaut channel. I talk about books, all kinds of books, books I like, books that I didn't like, books that I found in my traveling around the country, looking at different thrift stores, library sales. And this is just my way of sharing some of the things that I found and some of the information that I've picked up over time. I watched yesterday's or the day before's edition that I did. There was a few things in there that I thought maybe needed a little clarification. I mentioned then that I'm not any kind of an expert on these things, but what I do is I have some experience at looking at different books, and so that's really what I would like to share, the experiences that I've come across and some of the things I've had to research. My experience is almost completely limited to, like I said, what I find in thrift stores, garage sales, what have you, cast-off stuff, discarded things, things that people have discarded, and so I've looked through a ton of that kind of thing. And sometimes you can find some interesting things in the middle of what people have discarded. So when I was talking the last time about this might be hard to find, or that might be hard to find, or you might see this, frame that in the consideration of your thrift store hunts or your used bookstore, what you're looking for. Because in this age of the internet, I mean, if you are looking for a particular type of book, you can find it. It might be in France, who knows? It might be in Russia, who knows? Somebody might have it worldwide. You can search for these things. So if there's a particular thing that you are looking for in this age, you can find it if you want to pay for it. That's the key right there for me, is I don't want to pay a premium for these things. One of the things about the rise of the electronic books or e-books is that a lot of people have felt like, okay, I can carry around a library in a small tablet. I can put all the books on there that I will ever want to read, and I don't have to have the the physical copies of these books anymore. I don't need those. And that's a boon for guys like me, for people like me who are interested in having the actual book. That's a question that a lot of people have. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not a question that a lot of people have, I'm assuming, but that's a choice, I guess, that people have to make. Between okay, do I want to have books on what kind of media do I want to have my books on? Do I want to read them off the computer? Do I want to read them off of a small screen? Do I want to have the actual book in hand when I'm reading it? And of course, everybody's going to have their own opinion on that, and each opinion is right for that person. For myself, obviously, I would prefer to have the book. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. But it's not that I don't have a tablet and I don't use it for certain books. What I have found for me that the electronic books have been excellent for are books that are out of the public domain, or in the public domain, and their copyrights have expired, and so publishers can provide these for free across the internet. And I believe, the publishing date right now is like 1923 or so. Books that have been published before that time are now what's considered in the public domain, and that means that anyone is allowed to print and publish and sell that material. So, for instance, you go into a major bookseller like Barnes & Noble, they have like their line of classics, and almost all of those classics, you will see, almost all of them are in the public domain. Say Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Jane Austen. You see those kind of authors, and they have usually some kind of classics format, some kind of a series where each book looks similar, and they can sell those, and whatever they make on those kind of books is just pure profit. Well, of course, obviously they pay their costs, but they don't have to pay an author. They don't have an author's legacy or foundation, or they don't have to pay the family of that. And unless for whatever reason those copyrights have been able to be renewed. At any rate, that gets into a whole big thing. Copyright law is well out of my experience. I just understand that after the copyright expires, the material is able to be disseminated for free, and so that's where the ebooks to me become a real boon, because you can pick up a ton of that kind of stuff for free. Whereas if if you were going to buy some of that, it not only would it be expensive, but it might be very difficult to find. There's a lot of ancient texts, not ancient, old antiquity from the Roman times, from the Middle Ages, even from like 1700s. If you are interested in any of that sort of material, it can be very difficult to track it down. And if you do, in a physical copy, track it down, you are going to pay a premium for it, because I wouldn't necessarily say it's a specialist interest, but it is more specialized than, James Patterson or, John Grisham. And so, so for those kind of things, I felt like the electronic books, the Kindles, the whatever, if you have a Nook or whatever you might have, you don't have to have any of those specific type readers. You can simply just have a small tablet and download the app, and then you can then you can have your Kindle books on whatever device you would like. And so, for those things, to me, that is very, very well worthwhile. You get a chance to read a lot of things. I probably just simply would never have, it would have took a lot of effort to track them down and cost a lot of money. So, but on the other hand, if I were to run across any of those older books in nice editions, then I would pick them up, because for me, I do feel that print books. Some people, the internet is DTB, dead tree books. Okay, so I do feel that dead tree books are a. I don't know if it's just a tactile thing where I just enjoy having them, something that I can have physically in my hands, or what it is. But I have noticed that on two separate occasions where I began to read a book on an e-reader because I was traveling. I began to read it on the e-reader. I was enjoying the book. I wanted to finish it. And then I came home, and either I had a copy of it at home, or I found a copy while I was at home, and I bought that copy. And I actually, it's very hard to put into words, but I did feel as though the experience became richer. It's not something that you can actually explain. A lot of people might say, "Well, that doesn't make any sense." I suppose it might be comparable to those folks who say, "Well, I don't like CDs. I want to have a record. A record sounds better to me." Well, I can't tell the difference. I just can't. I've tried, but to me, this reading a book as opposed to reading it on an electronic media or on an electronic reader is somewhat similar, and I suppose the difference is about the same, very minute, but I do feel like it's more pleasurable. So, at any rate, so that's one of the reasons why I have the books that I have, the ones that I pick up, and that was just sort of a way of explaining what I consider, again, not my expertise, just my experience. My experience is limited to these discards that people, for whatever reason, whether it's because they bought an e-reader or not, or maybe it's an estate sale, for whatever reason, people have discarded them, and I get to go through them for a few dollars, or $1, 50 cents, what have you, and pick out some things that I think are interesting. Books, I don't have to tell anyone who enjoys reading or enjoys having books around them why I have these books. You'll already know, because you have the same thing, whether you call it a disease or whether you might call it an obsession. You have the same obsession that I do. If you have these things, no need to explain. People who don't have this obsession, you'll never be able to explain it to them, because they just won't get it. But to have books around me, obviously started, I think, when I was very young, very, very young. books represented certain ideas to me, whether those ideas were actually, whether they were really true or not, but they did seem to represent to me a kind of, I don't know, intelligence really isn't the word, but a kind of maybe striving for enlarging your mind. And so to me, I would look at these books. My father had many, many books when I was growing up, and or at least I seem to remember him. He probably didn't have as many as I remember, but it seemed like there were always books around the house. And these things seemed to be, like I said, they sort of indicated to me a goal to acquire this knowledge that was in these books. And far before I was able to actually read, interpret, and understand these kind of books, I spent a lot of time actually just looking at the different covers and what have you, and let my imagination run. So I developed sort of a love also, not just for what was inside the book, but what was outside the book. Outside of the book, the cover, the dust jacket, just the edition, the size, the weight, all these things, they seem to be indications of a kind of the word doesn't really come to me. It's just an indication of an ideas and knowledge, and so to me, I saw these things as being worthwhile in and of themselves. Almost so today, as I go around and look for books, sometimes I will find a very nice edition of something that I may think that the inside of the book, what it actually contains, is maybe not quite as worthwhile, but the edition itself is so nice, I still have an attraction to it. It still calls to me in a way. I still buy books like that, even if it may not necessarily be something that I feel is something that is going to enlarge my mind. I still get them because they're just an attractive addition, and I appreciate the attractiveness of this. I used to, I kind of made the joke to my dad here not that long ago. I spent so much time, absorbed in these covers and the idea of what these books might entail, and just picturing in my mind or imagining what these things might contain, that sometimes when I would read the book, I would become disappointed because it didn't match up to the cover. And I said, some people say, they go to the movie after they've read the book, and they say, the movie was nothing as good as the book. And sometimes I'll say, I've looked at the cover, now I've read the book, but the book wasn't nearly as good as the cover. So anyway, Okay, so I've talked a lot about that. I did want to try to get to a couple things today, just real quick. These are a couple books that I've read not too long ago. One fairly recently that I think is worthwhile, and I thought I would plug it here just for a minute while I still have the time. And one of the things that made me think of this, the friend that suggested that I do this in the first place, recently read War and Peace and thought that it was terrific, and that felt like I should have told him a long time ago how good it was, and that way he would have known. Well, so maybe I can make an end run around him this time. I just talk about another book by Tolstoy. This one is not a novel. This is a collection of stories that I have. The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Other Stories. And I don't know that I really have to plug Tolstoy. I think everybody knows that anybody who's associated themselves much with literature is quite well aware of Tolstoy. So I don't think that I necessarily have to sing his praises, although, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, or Karenina, I'm not really sure. Another one of those instances where I've only read it and never heard anybody talk about it. I always think Karenina in my head, but it might be Karenina. At any rate, those two books are fairly well known, I think, either because of movies that have been done over time or just because there are books that you see quite a bit if you go to a section that has classic books, classic literature. Those are two that you will see often. And but these stories, these are shorter stories. Some of them are a little bit long, almost I think what you would call novella, just slightly shorter than a short novel. And one of them is The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is in here, and also another one called The Kreutzer Sonata. And Haji Marat is another one. I believe that's that's the name of the story. Let me look. Yeah, Haji Marat or Haji Marat. Those were three of the stories, especially that I really enjoyed out of this book. And these are each one of Tolstoy's stories, I thought were quite a bit different. They did not revolve around the same. That's one of the problems, I think, with a single author collection of short stories. You might start out reading the first one and think, wow, this is really terrific. I really enjoy this. But by the time you get to the end, you might feel like, oh gosh, it's like I read the same story over and over and over. Tolstoy's stories, I think, are significantly different from each other. Some of them are based on his experience. Plus these span his whole career, so that makes a little bit more sense too. He was a younger man when he wrote some of these, and then he was quite a bit older when he finished up writing some of these. So that makes sense that some of these would be different, and some of them were based on experiences that he had while he was in the Crimean. He fought during the Crimean War. And some of them were based on just other things about Russian life. I thought these were fantastic representations of what it might have been like to live in Russia before the turn of the century. And also, there's more to it than just that, especially The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I thought that one was excellent as far as kind of trying to impart some more deeper ideas about what it means to be human. You know, where do we go? What's our life mean? Those kind of questions. I think that those are some of the questions when an author faces those questions and what to me sounds like truthful answers. Those are books that seem to really are impactful to me, and those are ones that I hold on to. One of the things that my friend asked is about translations. And to keep this under 20 minutes, I'm kind of running out of time, but just briefly, one of the things about translations, this one here is done by a husband and wife team, Pivar and Volkansky, PVR, Volkansky. PVR is the man's name, and his wife, Volkansky. She actually does the translating into English into a very rough translation. And her husband then takes the manuscript and essentially makes it into an English that is going to sound natural to English readers, or more natural at any rate. And so neither one of them are actually. It's a true collaboration. It's kind of interesting, and these are some, I guess you might even call them celebrity translators, because they have tackled most of the Russian canon, at least as far as what English readers are accustomed to. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. I believe they did some Chekhov. They've done. I'm not for sure if they did Bulgakov or not. They might have. I think they did. But at any rate, they've done an enormous amount of work on this Russian literature, and so they've been very well praised already by people in print. And if you study anything about translations whatsoever, you'll find that. It's kind of a strange thing. There are a lot of people that get very excited about translations, and to me, I think that I would say that there obviously I say there's nothing absolutely at all wrong with this translation. I can't read Russian. I couldn't tell you if they had seriously flubbed up or not. I might be just reading right along and think, oh, okay, well that's just the way that it is, and they've made terrible mistakes. I wouldn't have any clue. The only thing that I can do as a non-reader of Russian is to say that this sounds natural, or this sounds stylistically this is going along. Doesn't sound clunky. That's about all I can do. But people who do know, give this team very high marks for translation. The first real translator into English of Russian was a woman by the name of Constance Garnett, and a lot of people don't like Constance Garnett. But I will just say this: that she essentially introduced the English-speaking world to Russian literature, and it made a tremendous impact on readers and writers at the time. And so I wouldn't necessarily just toss her aside and say that she's no good. Again, I can't tell you whether she is or not. The only way you might be able to do that is to actually compare translations. Maybe you could take a different translation and compare it to hers and see, what you think. If one sounds clunkier than the other, or if one imparts the meaning better. But I would encourage people that I used to do this too. I wanted to know what's the best translation out there, and I don't know that there is such a thing when you are talking about translations. I think you can approach the spirit of something and maybe capture the spirit better than some others. But if you do, it may not be a literal translation. It may be a rather free translation. Maybe more as if you are going to translate the meaning rather than the exact words, because an English reader, even if you did translate the exact words, might not understand it very well. And one of the examples we talked about was cultural things, where in America, you might say something, for instance, like say you want something to happen, or you don't want something to happen, so you say knock wood, right? And if you just say, well, as long as they get here today, knock on wood. All right. So if you say that to someone, they immediately know that you are what you're trying to get at. It's you're invoking an old superstition to make sure that something, or hopefully that something will happen or won't happen. Well, there's probably some parts of the world, many parts of the world, maybe 90% of the world, who knows, that would have absolutely no idea what you were talking about if you said knock wood. And so if you translate that into another language, then you are faced with the idea: do I say knock wood, or do I say something that's comparable to them? Maybe they say spit on the ground. I don't know. Whatever they might say. And so what do you choose? And so translators are continually having to make choices, like millions of thousands upon thousands of choices, how they are going to translate these things. And so, one translator, chances are they may get certain parts of the book key, right dead on. They might really translate it well. And maybe other parts they don't. And in another translation, same thing, And so I guess my point now, after having read many translations and having read, actually, that's one of the reasons why I learned French, was so I wouldn't have to deal with translations. I could get it straight from the horse's mouth, I guess. Which there's another cultural thing, if you say that, if you go to Hungary and you say straight from the horse's mouth, they may think you're crazy. So. At any rate, so I learning French and trying to read it in the original, and then actually while I was reading it, I read a lot of translations to help me get the meaning of what I was learning. To me, I have felt that this translation question is not as large as people tend to make it. I do think there can be bad translations, but what I have thought for myself, the way that I have settled this issue is, if it is a major publisher, say, like for instance, this publisher is Knopf, Alfred A. Knopf. You have Random House. You have some very big publishing houses. I generally tend to accept the fact that that their translations is probably serviceable. Now that's obviously not a hard and fast rule. You're placing your trust in some editor somewhere, but like I said, I think that the question isn't as large as I used to make it out to be. I used to think it must have been very, very important. And one of the reasons I used to think it was important was because I would hear people who spoke both languages, who were fluent in both languages, and they would they would review a certain book and say, "Oh, well, this is just terrible. You need to read it in the original because it's so much better in the original." Well, I imagine they're probably correct. It probably is much better in the original. Some languages probably do not translate very well. You may never be able to really exactly capture the spirit of the thing because you can't use the same words, and you're not hitting on the same cultural touchstones. Those very same books that they are saying, "Oh, this is just terrible. You have to read it in the original." I'm coming to the book, and before I read this review or read this comment, I've thought, "Wow, this was really a great book. I really enjoyed this. This really, really had an impact." And then I read this, they say, "Oh, it's just terrible. You should have read it in the original." And I think, well, that wasn't my experience. So that's essentially what I would say about translations. That's not really something that I would worry too much about. And if it's a classic piece of literature, you will probably have maybe several translations to choose from. Tolstoy's one. You could find Constance Garnett. You can find the PVR and Volokhonsky, and there have been many others. And you could compare and you see which one you thought. And if you found one of those translators you thought, well, this one was the best, well, then I would pick them for all the rest of the translations that you used. All right. Any rate, that's just my 2 cents on translations. Again, that's certainly not a hard and fast rule, but I have a lot of books to read, and I'm sure that you have a lot of books to read, and I don't want to get bogged down in a question that's going to keep me from reading something. So that to me that was my solution to that problem. All right, well, I went over my time a little bit this time. I'll try to get to the other book I was going to recommend last time, but for instance, I do recommend Tolstoy. I recommend both War and Peace and his shorter stories. I think that they are well worth your time. But if you don't feel like launching into War and Peace, which is a commitment, if you don't feel like launching into something like that, give some of his shorter stories a try. I think you two will enjoy them, especially if you have an interest in that part of the world. All right. Well, like I said, with next time I will try to get to some other books, and we'll see you then.